Hello and good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, Canada as an H-1B alternative. Today's presentation will last approximately 45 minutes, and that includes an audience question and answer session after the main presentation. So we highly encourage you to ask a question if you have it, and to do so, you can type it in using the GoToWebinar chat box that you should see on your screen. So type that question in, and we will try to get to it at the very end. Some more housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, and we will send everyone a link to download the recording tomorrow afternoon. You will also receive a link to download the slide deck, as well as the SHRM and HRCI continuing education credits. All of these materials will arrive in your email inboxes tomorrow afternoon, so please keep an eye out on that message. And if for whatever reason you don't receive it, just let us know and we'll be sure to send it your way. So for nearly 20 years, Envoy has been on a mission to fix the inefficient, frustrating, and confusing immigration process. Envoy combines expert legal representation with innovative technology to deliver the only platform that makes it seamless for companies to hire, mobilize, and manage a global workforce. Envoy secures work authorization in over 100 countries, has grown 33% year over year, and works with over 1,000 customers. We are particularly proud of our NPS score, which is a testament to the employee experience that we provide. Also joining us for today's webinar is Mob Squad. Mob Squad is an innovative company that helps U.S. companies retain their top-tier foreign talent when they do not have an immigration path in the United States. For example, if an employee is not selected in the H-1B cap, Mob Squad has a unique partnership with the Canadian government that allows them to get software engineers and their spouses visas and have them relocated and working in as little as just 4 weeks. Mob Squad will outline more about their model and approach later in today's presentation. And today's presenters are, starting first, with Marina Falkina, RCIC. Marina is in charge of providing Envoy's Canadian immigration services, and she brings over 16 years of experience in the Canadian immigration field, inclusive of her previous experience working as an immigration assistant at the Canadian Consulate General in Detroit. Marina holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Windsor, as well as an associated degree in humanities and social sciences from Washtenaw Community College. Marina is a member in good standing with the Immigration Consultants of Canada Regulatory Council, RCIC. Marina also has considerable experience interacting with Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, Canada Border Services Agency, Service Canada, as well as Canadian, U.S., and global immigration attorneys and other governmental agencies. Marina, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. And also joining us is Irfan Raji, the founder and CEO of Mob Squad. Irfan is also a venture partner at Relay Ventures and an adjunct professor at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, and he's a senior advisor to the Canadian government. Irfan, pleasure to have you again.
Thanks for having me, Eric. Great to be here.
Awesome. So, Irfan and Marina, we are going to hop in the presentation, but I do want to just put up this quick legal disclaimer. The information is not intended as legal advice. If you do have additional questions, please reach out to a licensed practitioner or a qualified attorney. So with that, Irfan, I'm going to turn the presentation over to you.
Great. Thank you, Eric, and thank you, everybody, for your interest in this topic on Canada and immigration, especially as it relates to technology talent. A little under 2 years ago, we founded this business, Mob Squad, which purpose is actually to help U.S. technology companies retain their technology talent. As Eric mentioned to you, I am also a venture partner at Relay Ventures, And we were seeing that our U.S. companies that had technology talent, software engineers, were really struggling either to get more talent into the country to win the H-1B lottery. They were losing talent because talent.
Hey, Irfan.
Yes, sir.
Irfan, we're having some difficulties hearing you. Do you want to call back in real quick? Or
yeah, I'll call in from another line.
Okay. So Irfan, do you mind if I show the next couple slides?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. So in these next couple slides, Irfan is going to just discuss how his company Mob Squad helped select few individuals move to Canada. So we'll leave these up here briefly so our attendees can read and just understand their journey and how Mob Squad helped them. And then this next one here are just some quotes that he would like our attendees to read. Again, these are their own words, just showing how Mob Squad has helped them bringing individuals into Canada.
And as a quick side note, while we're waiting for Irfan to dial in, actually, I can speak on the practical side of things, as I assisted at least to one of these individuals and his family with the process, because we work very closely with Mob Squad in these types of cases. So it was certainly exciting to see how literally when someone doesn't know what's going to happen to him and his family in the next couple of weeks, such company as Mob Squad comes to the rescue, and we partner together and basically, allow not only a wonderful family to, have some safety in terms of their future and have the ability to come to Canada and start working, but also allowing Canadian businesses to grow and U.S. businesses not to lose their highly skilled workers. So this was certainly very exciting to see.
Definitely.
And it's Irfan again. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Well, thank you for covering, and sorry about that technology challenge. It's a bit ironic considering we help technology companies to have a tech challenge like that. But I'm glad that you went through one story. I mean, such a typical story for us with U.S. firms that we work with. To have individuals with an OPT visa after he got his master's degree from the University of Pennsylvania and won to lose the H-1B cap, 3 times in a row and be faced with having to go back to China. But instead, we got him into Canada. I think he was in under 4 weeks, Marina. You helped us with that one, I remember.
I believe so. This was truly a record speed.
Yeah, that was great. And he's now living in Halifax, working still for Pedal Card, which is a New York-based scale up. And he's just bought a house. He's got a young daughter you see in that picture, and he's settling his family into being Canadian. He'll be a Canadian citizen here within 4 years. Maybe we could go to the next situation. This is another very typical situation. Andre was working in New York for a company called Betterment. He'd been there for 2 or 3 years, and he had a challenge renewing his H-1B. I think for those of you that have talent on H-1Bs that have been renewing, you would see that the requests for evidence or RFEs have gone up pretty dramatically, and Andre was one of these cases. He had a challenge renewing his H-1B, and so was faced with having to go back to Portugal. In this situation, he's a Portuguese national, and instead, we worked with him. And again, actually, Andre we had in Canada within a few days. It took us about 3 or 4 weeks to get his work permit issued, but within a week he was in Calgary, and a month later he was back on the job for Betterment. And if you go to the next slide, Eric. This is a bit of what it was like in his words to work with Mob Squad, and I'll just pause here and let you guys read the text because I don't need to read it to you, but it gives you a flavor for how we work with these individuals that are challenged to deal with these issues. The picture of Andre there just working in our Calgary office. We create these sort of special client portals, we call them, within our office space, so that every individual client feels like they have their own space within our space in Mob Squad in Calgary. So maybe it'd be helpful if you hit the next slide to talk a little bit about how we do this, and what the background is for our ability to get this done in Canada. Actually, is the difference in the Canadian immigration system. And so, for a bit of context, this slide shows you what Canadian immigration has been like over the last 20 years. And if you were to go back 30 or 40 years, you would see this trend has sort of been an upward trend over time. The government of Canada currently has a policy objective to bring in 1% of the total population of the country into Canada each year via immigration. And so this last year in 2019, I believe the target was 330,000. They actually hit 340,000, and this year the target's 350,000. If you go to the next slide, you'll see what this looks like in terms of the mix of immigration. It's actually very different in Canada versus the U.S. If you were to look at permanent residency cards that are given out in Canada, which is the equivalent of a Canadian green card, versus the green card in the U.S., the mix is different. In the U.S., it's much more family reunification. In Canada, it skews towards economic migrants, or people that are coming for work. And so you'll see that sort of over time, as the numbers have been growing, they've been sort of proportionally growing across each of these different mixes. What's interesting to many Americans that I talk to, and I spend a lot of time in the U.S., is this isn't a left political or right political choice. In Canada we have the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party, and the equivalents would be probably the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. The next slide shows you that irrespective of political party in power, whether it be liberal or conservative, the policy objectives of both mainline parties are to increase immigration. The actual debate in Canada, if you go to the next slide, isn't whether or not we should have immigration and whether or not immigration is good for the country. It's actually how much more immigration should we have. And so there's actually a really interesting debate right now around moving that 1% target to 2%. And it's behind this backdrop of a pro-immigrant economic policy, irrespective of political party, that we are able to issue work permits, especially in partnership with the Canadian government, because we're part of their dedicated service channel and have a dedicated immigration officer because they want to see more economic migrants. That's really the fundamental thesis of how Mob Squad was able to start. Let's go to the next slide. And I'll pass this over to Marina so we can talk a little bit about some of the different ways that people are able to come into Canada.
Thank you so much, Irfan. So now we will talk a little bit about the most popular paths to working in Canada on a temporary work permit or immigrating to Canada and applying for permanent residence. And you may have heard some of these, and we'll actually go into greater detail about the two particular paths. But generally speaking, temporary foreign worker program is one of the most popular programs where Canadian employers can bring in the talent, foreign national workers to fill their labor shortages. And basically, this is a process that's very similar to the H-1B visa in the United States, somewhat similar. It doesn't have a cap. It does have its own little tricks and catches. But that is essentially a process where a Canadian employer needs to file a specific application, and then if that application is approved, a foreign national may apply for a temporary work permit, and we will talk about this later in the presentation. The next path, when we talk about permanent residence, is strictly geared towards economic migrants. Basically, there are specific streams from federal skilled workers to Canadian experience class and other provincial nominee-oriented programs that allow foreign nationals to apply for permanent residence based on their skills and, of course, if they're able to contribute to the contribute economically to fill the labor shortages in Canada as well. And of course, we cannot forget the family reunification and family sponsorships where Canadian citizens and Canadian permanent residents can sponsor their relatives, their spouses and children or parents and grandparents, if they're bringing their family to live with them in Canada. And last but not least, of course, Canada welcomes refugees and individuals from around the globe, people who basically were forced to leave their home country, if they're escaping war, persecution, and natural disasters. So Canada becomes their safe haven in that instance. Now, we're going to talk about the most common way for Canadian companies to bring foreign national workers if they need to fill a labor shortage on a temporary basis. And this is a very brief outline of the current labor market impact assessment process, just to give you an idea of what's involved if we're talking about a regular position. Typically, employers in Canada must post a job under specific circumstances with the specific requirements, and this is a mandatory requirement, the 4 weeks posting, and then file the actual labor market impact assessment application, which is a formal application between a Canadian employer and the Canadian government, basically to prove and provide genuine evidence that there are no willing and able Canadian workers who can fill the job. And no, that process typically takes 2 to 4 months. It really fluctuates on the workload, so sometimes it could get a little unpredictable. Now, assuming all of that goes through fine and Service Canada approves the labor market impact assessment, only after that the foreign national may proceed to the actual work permit application. And this is where it gets really dicey and unpredictable in terms of the processing times. Here we have, roughly 4 to 8 weeks of processing. However, depending on the country of the foreign national's current residence or citizenship, this could be easily 12 plus weeks, and in some instances, in some countries, it could go, literally over a year.
Oh, wow.
in some cases. So again, this is a regular process for the labor market impact assessment. As you can see, the best case scenario, 4 to 7 months at best. Well, it's probably not the best case scenario, but that's what we have under regular LMIA process. Now, in the next slide, we're going to talk about really briefly what happens when a foreign national would like to apply for permanent residence directly from abroad. Let's say they're residing in Malaysia or in China or in India or any other country, and they would like to apply for permanent residence. The process obviously has to start with determining the eligibility under one of the current streams, so it could take a couple of weeks to do that. There has to be a profile submitted, the actual application filed, and then you have to wait for the government to provide you with a result, which could take, well, I'd say probably 14 plus months under our regular process. Now, this is the process that used to be before the introduction of what's called express entry system, and we will touch on that shortly. But just to give you an idea of basically the temporary means, which we talked in the previous slide, and the permanent venue in terms of permanent residence to Canada, so you can see the processing times and the outline to give you an idea of what used to be or what can be in some instances. Now, when we move on to talk about the two enhancements, and they're still relatively new enhancements to the Canada's immigration system, we're going to talk about global talent stream, and we're going to talk about express entry permanent residency. Now, really briefly, before we go into each of those, I just wanted to mention that global talent stream, it is still a labor market impact assessment application, because a lot of people, confuse it with like a totally different category. Yes, it is a stream within the temporary foreign worker program. It is still an LMI application. And really briefly, express entry permanent residency is not a category. Again, this is one of the most popular questions that I get from a lot of applicants saying, oh, can I apply under the express entry stream? Well, it is actually a system. It is a system that allows Canadian government to effectively select qualified applicants. So again, express entry is not a stream, it's a system. Now, next slide. Under the global talent stream, as I mentioned, what is the biggest thing that literally blew everyone's minds? And, I've been doing GTS LMI applications for, a few years now since they've introduced them. It's certainly the speed. So as we've talked, the regular stream involves posting a job 4 weeks, filing the application 2 to 4 months, and then applying for work permit, 4 to 8 weeks, depending on the, processing times at the visa office. Now, when we are getting into the global talent stream that really tailors to a specific IT occupations, you don't have to advertise. So you're literally shaving off the 4 weeks of the processing and preparation time. So no advertising. Now, we still are going to be filing the labor market impact assessment, as I mentioned, because it is a labor market impact assessment application. And here is the catch. There will be a requirement for the Canadian employer to develop and file a labor market benefits plan. And this brings the processing time for the LMIA under the global talent stream to 2 weeks. That's, technically 10 business days. That's the government standard. And I want to briefly zoom in on this because this is a very critical point for a lot of companies. Yes, it is a catch. You don't have to advertise. You do have to put in together a very robust plan. But when you think about it as a company and you are looking to expand and hire in Canada as it is, you already have an HR plan in place, most likely, chances are. So you will actually work with Service Canada program officer once the application is filed. And by the way, you don't have to have a plan when you file the application. You can simply mark to be discussed with a program officer, which is really an incredible processing, I guess, trick if you want, because you're still going to do it. It's just you're given the opportunity to discuss everything you need to discuss, how to bring, Canadian workers, how to enhance your company's ability to meet your own business and HR needs with the officer. So I've actually sat in a few interviews when the employer needs to discuss these things with the program officer, and believe me, the officers are not there to trick anyone, to force them or lock them into doing things that you don't need to do. If you don't need to do something, you will be able to discuss any options and any commitments, because at the end of the day, when the application is approved, and yes, it will go through the process very quickly, it is truly a 2-week processing time, you will have a signed, agreed upon, sealed and delivered labor market benefits plan that you agree to, and that would be the basis of this LMIA under the Global Talent Stream approval. And then once that's done, we move to the work permit application, and the foreign national may apply for their work permit. And if you compare it with previously indicated 4 to 8 weeks, now you're looking at 2 weeks for a work permit. So if you look at the entire process, it is absolutely possible to get the person within a month. Now, the only caveat here is that if biometrics are required at the work permit stage, then you could be looking at a few weeks delay probably. But purely speaking, from the procedural standpoint under the global talent stream, we're looking at 2 weeks for the LMIA and then roughly 2 weeks for the actual work permit, which is a huge improvement. If previously we were discussing probably 8 to, even more, sometimes months of processing time. Now, when we are talking about the foreign nationals who are looking to apply for permanent residency under the express entry, what happens is when they have the actual job offer in Canada, and that stems from the global talent stream, it actually becomes easier for them to apply for permanent residence, and the process will be slightly different. Now, you would still have to determine the qualifications, and you still have to see what stream you're going to fall under. And also there's a merit-based point system, which we'll touch on a little later, so you can see the allocation of points. So it does take a little bit of time to sit down and figure out how many points you would get under the stream and under the express entry. And then you would have to submit the profile, of course. And oh, sorry, go back. Sorry about that. Yeah. Of course, you'll have to submit the profile with Canada Immigration, and typically, it's a fairly quick process. And then you'll have to wait for the invitation to apply. So a lot of people confuse submitting the profile with the actual application for permanent residence. These are two separate things. When you're submitting the profile under the express entry, you're literally, as I say, you're just putting yourself out there. You are presenting your resume, so to speak. And of course, all the information has to be accurate. And then you wait for the government to issue what they call rounds of invitations. And they typically happen twice a month. So that's why we have 2 to 4 weeks for the actual application for the PR. And then you will have 60 days after receipt of your application, of your invitation to apply, to actually complete your application, gather all the documents, and again, file for your permanent residence. Now, processing times under the express entry, as opposed to 12 months, they are now at 6 months. Some of them could be processed even in fewer months. We've had some cases that were done, I think the record one was 2 or 3 months. Usually happens around Christmas time. They like to give people Christmas presents. So this has certainly streamlined the process for qualified individuals. And this is where you'll see we're going to tie together basically the fact that the person is working in Canada on a work permit with their ability to qualify faster, under the express entry. This is a chart to give you an idea of the qualification examples to see how many points are allocated in each category, because you still have to, have the age, the education, language proficiency, and then if you have a spouse, there's certain additional points. And of course, the big ones are Canadian experience. And obviously, the more experience in Canada you have, the better it would be for your overall score. So what happens is, let's say for a moment that you qualify as a federal skilled worker, you've never worked in Canada before, and you decided to apply under the express entry. You do have your qualifications under the federal skilled worker. You do get the 67 points. So that's the first tier level that you have to pass. However, you go into this little chart and you try and see how many points you're going to get under the express entry. And you might run into an issue where, okay, you might get enough points for age, let's say only 30 years old, and you're fine, you're going to get enough points there. Let's say you do get your master's degree from one of the top-ranked universities in the United States or even abroad. You can get your equivalency for that. You may speak perfect English and get your official language test results. Let's say you don't have a spouse, so you're just on your own. And then what happens is that you may still not have enough points in order to be selected under the express entry. Current points cut off roughly, I think now is between 460 and 470, 475. They fluctuate on a monthly basis. But the point of the matter is that if you don't have your Canadian experience, if you don't have your work permit in Canada, your chances of qualifying under the express entry are actually, have fewer chances basically. So having a work permit in Canada, and of course having the employer who is willing to support your application under the Global Talent Stream, and then looking at your chances of qualifying not only under one of the streams, but also under the express entry, that makes a huge, huge difference, as we have seen with quite a few employees that we already worked with MOP Squad. And so hopefully this was useful information for you.
Great, thanks, Marina. Irfan, I'm going to turn it back to you on this next slide here.
Great, thank you, Eric, and thank you, Marina. Listening to what Marina went through there, which is a very different system in Canada than in the U.S., right? It's a predictable system, it's mathematical, and for certain types of workers like software engineers, it's very predictable and it's very quick. I think every one of our engineers except one we've got into the country in 4 weeks or less. I think the longest was 5 weeks, and which is a very different experience for employers than I think what typically you see in the U.S. with uncertainty around the lottery and long time lags, right? Because the lottery only runs once a year. But that's not the only benefit of coming to Canada. There's other benefits. When you come to Canada, you actually have the opportunity to pull talent from around the world. And so instead of hunting just in your local market, you actually have the entire world as your talent pool. The second thing is, Canada is the next closest thing. There's proximity to the United States. For most of our clients, their engineers are working, within a 2-hour flight or 3-hour flight of their home office, and they're in similar or the same time zone. Unlike other markets around the world, Canada also has a very strong intellectual property framework and regime, both from a case law perspective as well as a legislative perspective. And so intellectual property that's created by software engineers is conclusively owned by the employer. Additionally, it's a fast path to citizenship. For many people on the H-1B visa in the U.S., it can be 20 years or longer, especially if you're an Indian national or Chinese national, to get citizenship, just because of how the system works and the caps on that. In Canada, it's under 4 years. Once you get a permanent residency card, which you can usually get in 6 months if you're a knowledge worker, it's 3 years after that, and you can apply for citizenship. The next thing is really interesting as you look at some of the rhetoric in the U.S. right now around H-4s and H-4 EADs for spouses of H-1B workers. In Canada, when you apply to get one of these fast-track global talent stream work permits, you also can apply to get an open work permit valid for any job in the country for the spouse of that individual. And so we do that for all of our software engineers. And the last thing is that cost of living in most Canadian cities is lower than most American cities, and so talent has a very high quality of life. When you hear all of that, Eric, if we go to the next slide, it's not surprising that a number of very large American companies have set up offices and have hired thousands of people in their Canadian subsidiaries like Amazon, Facebook, Google, just recently even Instacart. Google just announced 2 weeks ago that they're looking to hire 5,000 more people in the next 3 years here in Canada. Amazon's trying to hire 2,000 more software engineers out of their Vancouver office this year. They did 1,000 last year. And so these big companies are coming here not just to access Canadian talent, it's actually to do the things we've talked about with respect to immigration, which is to get access to the world. If you go to the next slide, what we were seeing for our Relay Ventures companies, where I'm a venture partner, was that our companies were smaller than Amazon and Facebook and Google. And if they wanted to come to Canada just to have 5 employees or 10 employees, the fixed costs of doing that were just too high. They had to create a cross-border tax and legal structure. They have to manage remittances to the government. They have to find a health care plan, which is often difficult to do for only a handful of people, 5 or 10, because insurers want to back away from not having a portfolio of risk. They need to actually find a physical office space and take care of the ongoing administration. They had to set up a board where they would have to have a resident Canadian director, a whole series of obstacles, not to mention the obstacles that Marina talked about earlier with respect to the labor markets benefit plan. Because moving somebody on to a fast-track global talent stream work permit does require you to make commitments to the government to do local market training at the local universities or to hire interns and do training programs for other staff in the market to help build the local labor market. And so that difficulty of taking on those commitments with Service Canada, as well as these fixed costs, made it impossible for this tool that Amazon and Google and Facebook were using to be used for smaller companies that maybe just wanted to save 1 or 2 employees that had an OPT that was expiring in H-1B. If you go to the next slide, that's really how we created this Mob Squad system. What we do is we become the employer of record. We sponsor your employee in. So if you have an individual like Juan who's on an OPT that's in this H-1B cap and it's his or her last chance to get an H-1B, if they lose this last time, we employ them in Canada. We house them in our space. We apply for their work permit. We are the sponsoring employer, the employer of record. We provide them benefits. We help their spouse get a work permit. We help them move into the country. We pick them up at the airport. We help them find a home. We help their kids get into the right schools. We help their spouse get a job. We sort of have this white glove service. Their actual work, though, is done for you. And so they're contracted back in step 1, back to you on an exclusive evergreen basis. They use your email, your hardware. We don't touch any of their intellectual property. We have no access to their code. And so you get all of the benefits of coming to Canada without any of the fixed costs or ongoing costs of having to manage all of these labor market benefits that you have to promise the government. We take that on your behalf. And so it's like creating a virtual subsidiary. If you're coming to Canada at scale, 100 people, 200 people, you probably don't need this. You can do it yourself. But if you only have a handful of people, maybe this year only 1 person that you're really worried about, that's where we help. If you hit the next slide. One of the things that we worked on with Envoy this year is to talk to their clients in advance to plan this as their backup option. For those of you that spend time talking to foreign nationals that are in the H-1B cap lottery this year, especially if it's their last chance and they're on an OPT that will expire sometime in 2020, there's an extreme amount of anxiety attached to this, which actually affects employee productivity. one of the things that we've seen with individuals that we have moved to Canada is their productivity goes up because they're spending less time worrying about their visa situation or their spouse's visa situation or whether or not they're going to get kicked out of the country at some future date, because they're guaranteed, so long as they don't break the law, they're guaranteed to be a Canadian citizen after 3.5 years. And so one of the things that we are doing with some of our current clients as well as Envoy's clients is to offer you the opportunity to pre-reserve one of our work permits that we've already applied for from Service Canada. And so you can go to your employees and say, if you don't win this H-1B lottery, this last chance, your backup plan is to be a Canadian citizen and to keep your job, which is a pretty good backup plan. And we find it takes a lot of the anxiety and a lot of the stress out of the system. Because we know that 50% of people that are in the cap this year are likely to lose based on historic math, what we can do is take the total demand across all of Envoy's clients for all of the folks that would like to pre-reserve, and then use a little bit of portfolio theory to make sure that we have enough permits already issued, so that step that Marina was talking about that takes 2 weeks to get the first work permit, then 2 weeks to have it issued to the individual, we cut that time in half. But we also can come back conclusively and say, yep, you do qualify. And so we've got a site there, a URL there that's specifically for Envoy clients. We'd encourage you to look at it if this is something that is interesting to you. We will call you back. The human will call you back. We'll make sure that that individual is an individual whose qualifications, whose experience would qualify for a work permit, so you know in advance before you make any commitments. And should you need that following April 1st, we're already there to help you. I think that's
great. Thank you so much. Great. Thank you so much, Irfan, and Marina. Thank you so much for the great presentation today. Before I move on to some additional end of the questions, Irfan, one question did come in regarding Mop Squad. So to clarify, does Mop Squad exist in the U.S. or Canada?
So we have legal entities on both sides of the border. We serve U.S. clients. We also serve some Canadian clients, but we serve U.S. clients, and our offices are only in Canada. So we bring people into Canada. All of our engineers, once they get a work permit in Canada, work out of one of our Canadian offices. We do also then, with Envoy, apply for each of them to get a B1 visa, so they can come back to their client, which is really their current job, so the current company they're working for right now, for meetings and trainings as required.
Gotcha. Great. Thanks. So we have a lot of great questions coming in. So I want to make sure we save a couple minutes for that. So just very briefly, I'm going to skip ahead to the SHRM and HRCI continuing education credits. If you would like to take a moment to copy these down, again, they will be sent out tomorrow afternoon. So we start with questions. A couple questions for Marina. Marina, why is it longer for certain countries when it comes for applying for a work permit?
Well, actually, it depends on what your question is about, because if the work permit is under the global talent stream, that is the beauty of getting the work permit under the GTS. Doesn't matter what country you're from, your work permit would be processed in 2 weeks. So I'm guessing your question pertains to any other stream. It is true, some countries take longer. It literally depends on the volume of applications received. If you look at the processing times, you can, go on the IRCC's website and basically check what they are. They are unpredictable, but it stems from the fact that, let's say if you are, and I don't deal with those cases, but I know from other colleagues, if you are a caregiver from the Philippines, I don't have this in front of me, but I believe if you're applying for a work permit from that country, you could be waiting for quite a few months. Again, I don't have the actual data. But if, for example, you are, you could be an Indian citizen, but if you are residing in Germany, for example, you have legal status or a work permit in Germany, and you are applying for a regular work permit, the processing times could be, basically less time, simply because the office in Germany is not as busy as the one in, Manila, Philippines. But this would be a regular, work permit application. If we are talking about global talent stream, these are taken on a priority basis regardless of what country the person is applying from, and that's the beauty of it, to processing for the work permit.
Gotcha. Thanks. Next question, Marina. Do only applicants aged 18 to 31 qualify for the express entry system?
Good question. The fact of the matter is that it would be impossible to say who would qualify depending on the age. I would certainly say that applicants aged 18 to 31 would have probably a higher chance of qualifying because, as you could see from one of my last slides in the presentation, there are many, there's so many categories that you have to meet. You have to have so many points under language, under experience, and so forth. And obviously, if you fall into that category, you'll get the top score for age. So you've got that little check mark. So the answer to the question would be no, not only 18-year-olds or people between the 18 and 31 years of age qualify, but chances are they are going to be in that category that will highly likely to qualify.
Gotcha. So Irfan and Marina, and for our attendees, but Irfan and Marina, I know we're coming up close on the 1:45. Are you guys okay if we go over a little bit? Do we just have a couple more great questions?
Sure.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Great. So Irfan, we have a couple of questions. I'm going to turn to you specifically on Mob Squad, and then there's another general Canadian trends one that I would like to ask. So with regards to Mob Squad, so your website focuses on software engineers, but are your services strictly for software engineers and tech companies?
So the services are for just software engineers, technical workers, so data scientists, data engineering would qualify, machine learning, mobile computing. We do serve non-tech companies as clients, but for tech skills. And the reason is particular because the Global Talent Stream program, that 4-week permit, which is what we really rely on. I mean, we don't want to have a 6 or 12-month permanent residency process because I think that's not as compelling to our clients. But the program that we rely on really does focus on technology talent. That's what the government really has created that program for, and so the business is focused where the policy objective is focused.
Gotcha. And does Mob Squad work with contingent workers?
No. So all of our staff would be people that are full-time employees of ours that you effectively would want to have as full-time employees of yours. It's very difficult. The cost of issuing the permit for those commitments that the government asks us to take on are quite considerable. And so if it's not a long-term relationship, the price of actually just obtaining one of these permits is probably too high.
Gotcha. All right, and then shifting gears a little bit, came across a story on CIC News. And Irfan, I was curious if you can talk a little bit more about the recent trend of Canada attracting more international students.
Yeah, I mean, as we talked about at the opening, I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of British Columbia, but have been involved also with U.S. universities and have seen, and this is information that you would read about in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, but you're seeing more international students applying to Canada and fewer international students applying to the United States right now, and I think that's just because of the rhetoric. I think foreigners are looking at what's being said about foreign nationals in each of these countries. It's super positive in Canada, and I think it's mixed in the U.S., and so I think that's driving people to look to Canada to come for education.
Gotcha. Great, thanks. This next question, I'll open it up for Marina and Irfan. So Marina, I'll ask you for let you answer first. But a slide showed how the number of immigrants coming into Canada has been increasing over the years and will continue to increase. I'm curious, which Canadian cities are attracting the most immigrants?
Yeah, I was going to say, I wish it were Windsor, Ontario, where I'm from, but no. You're probably guessing that it's going to be Toronto. Certainly Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary. I'm guessing these are probably the two most popular. Was certainly, I'd say, with the clients that I've been working with, choice number one always falls on Toronto, certainly. And of course, the West Coast for Vancouver. I don't know if people are keen on going to, a White Horse or Yellowknife. Probably not. Irfan, how about you? Your experience in terms of where people really would love to settle? I'm guessing Toronto is also their first.
Yeah, I mean, I was born and raised in Vancouver. I lived in Toronto for 8 years. I've been in Calgary for 7 years. I've done a lot of business on the East Coast, so I've got familiarity with all of these cities. But I would say in order, Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, and then as a percentage of population, actually, Halifax attracts a bigger percentage than most other places in terms of new immigrants wanting to go there. And the reason for that, I think, is it's the temperate climate, but it's also close to the East Coast of the U.S. Halifax has 3 direct flights to New York, 3 direct flights to Boston. They're an hour and a half long, and it's a very low cost of living city, and so you can get paid reasonably well there. And a family of 4, like one is a great example, lives in Halifax. Family of 3 in his scenario, one income, but lives a very high quality of life. And what's interesting, if you were to look at, sorry, one last thing on that, if you were to look at the percentages, Toronto is a city of, I think, 5 million people now. And over 50% of people that live in Toronto weren't born in Canada. And if you go to a place like Calgary, I think it's more like 32%, but in Vancouver, somewhere in between. But these are still really big numbers in terms of percentage of population that's foreign national born.
Very interesting, very interesting. And we'll see what those numbers are toward the end of the year. It'll be super interesting to see. So this next question, for Marina and Irfan, if you want to chime in, please feel free to. But Marina, can you provide more details on the employer obligations for filing a global talent stream application? You mentioned a robust plan.
That's right.
But what does that, I guess, what does that look like, and what are the continued obligations from an employer perspective?
That's right. And I think Irfan mentioned briefly a few of those, but there are certain complementary and mandatory benefits that basically the employer would have to develop. And Service Canada provides a whole range of basically, you pick and choose what you would like to commit to. You're going to increase the number of Canadian citizens and permanent residents that are going to be employed full time. So you literally will have to say, okay, from let's say February 1st, 2020 to February 1st, 2021, we're committing to hiring 5 software engineers, for example. Or you're going to say, look, we're going to be establishing a certain partnership and work really closely with the post-secondary institutions, with colleges, universities. And yes, we're going to be bringing in, let's say, again, for a specific period of time, maybe 2 to 3 interns. And you're going to be asked very specific questions. What is going to be the the hourly wage that these interns are going to be paid? If there's going to be any training that they're going to be provided, or how this perhaps even a co-op program will benefit those students. Another example would be, are you going to be specifically providing training to Canadian citizens or permanent residents by virtue of bringing in a foreign national worker? Let's say you're claiming he is a specialist in artificial intelligence and he knows something particular about certain program, or whatever the case might be. Show us exactly what kind of training plan you're going to develop, so that this person, this foreign national, can onboard and then train Canadian citizens and permanent residents. So these are just some of the examples. There are the actual examples that I saw, and I'm sure Irfan can confirm. He's got it in the labor market benefits plan, because these are the things that the government is looking for, to work with employers. Again, it's not to work and force someone to do something they don't want to do, that doesn't really work for their business model. It's really to perhaps even enhance what they're doing already. So I would say, really briefly to wrap on that one, is that global talent stream and LMIA process may not work for everyone. We had a company once where I went through the interview with them, I explained the process, and then they said, well, we don't really want to hire anyone. Well, that kind of defeats the purpose of the entire process. So if you're not willing to do that from the beginning, then perhaps this is not the program for you. But if you are looking to grow your Canadian team, then this is definitely for you.
Yeah, I mean, I would reiterate what Marina said. I think the really important thing for people that haven't done it before to recognize is that for each work permit that you have issued, the work permit lasts for 2 years. You can get them a PR, or permanent residency, during that time period, so that they can stay working for you after the 2 years. But for each work permit, you need to take on multiple commitments. And so, and it's a discussion, as Marina talked about. It's an amicable discussion. But for us, We are doing multiple trainings at the university. We are doing multiple networking events. For each work permit, you got to hire Canadian citizens as interns, Canadian citizens as full-time employees. And so for many people, they're like, I want to move 2 foreign nationals that have expiring OPTs to Canada. I don't want to hire 5 Canadians as well. I don't have no need for that. And that's why we have a business, because we manage those commitments for you. We take them on ourselves. You don't have to worry about them. All you need to worry about is that you need this foreign national to continue working for you, and we make that happen. Well, Marina really makes it happen with us magically in 4 weeks.
Nice.
Do our best.
Great. Well, I think we're going to end things there. There were a couple of very specific questions that we can't address, so please reach out to a qualified professional for more information on those. And Irfan, we did get a couple more questions specific to Mob Squad. I will let you follow up with these individuals following the conclusion of today's webinar. Irfan and Marina, thank you so much for the presentation today. I know we went a little bit over, but we had a ton of great questions, so thank you for taking the time.
Our pleasure.
To our attendees, thank you so much for joining us today and for sticking around for the Q&A session. Hope you found today's event very insightful and enjoyed it. As a final reminder, the webinar will be sent out tomorrow afternoon, so you can download and listen to it, and you will also be able to view the slide deck. So again, thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.